Good evening. The headlines tonight, the 9th of June 1944. German resistance to the British and Canadian forces is strengthening. There's bitter fighting along the entire Normandy front. The battle for Caen is intensifying. American forces are advancing towards Cherbourg. They've finally taken Saint-Mère-Église. In the race to reinforce the battlefront, the Allies are towing artificial harbours to Normandy. General Eisenhower has issued a proclamation to the people of France.
Ici, Londres. Les Français parlent aux Français.
People of Western Europe, I have this message for all of you. Although the initial assault may not have been made in your own country, the hour of your liberation is approaching.
And good news about food. We're producing more, and there'll be few cuts in rations this year. Allied forces have continued to advance from the Normandy beaches, but they are facing increasingly strong German resistance. 10 German divisions have been identified, including more tank reinforcements. A major battle is taking place at Caen, which still hasn't been captured. But British tanks and infantry are making progress south of Bayeux. And there's progress too on the Cherbourg Peninsula, where American forces have finally secured the town of Saint-Mère-Église, where they first landed by parachute during the early hours of D-Day. They've blocked off the main roads and the railway line from Carentan to Cherbourg, and they've captured Isigny.
The town of Isigny burned late into the night, falling finally towards dawn as US forces entered the city to minimal resistance. For several hours, though, the streets echoed to the sound of sniper rifles and the returning fire from the Americans. This town was the boost they needed, a vital staging post from which a corridor can be opened between the two US bridgeheads. To the population, though, liberation has meant destruction. There isn't much left to salvage. We're now seeing the start of the second phase of the beachhead operations, a more concerted drive aimed at cutting off the Cherbourg Peninsula. All day yesterday, fighting intensified around Saint-Mère-Église. It was the first town liberated on D-Day, but has remained since then in contention. Men of the 82nd Airborne Division have held it against repeated German counterattack from the south. Today, though, the enemy units were finally beaten back, and the town belonged to America. Artillery battles had raged through the night, causing substantial damage. By morning, it was clear German casualties had been heavy. For strategic and psychological reasons, this was a town the Americans had to hold as the heavy fighting continues across northern France. Further east, British and Canadian forces are making some progress south of Bayeux, but have yet to penetrate defences around the strategically important town of Caen. Here, the tank battles continued unabated, with the Allies facing some of the strongest panzer units in France. To combat them, Monty's two crack desert divisions are moving into the battlefront. But even so, the prospect of Caen falling soon is bleak.
The English Channel was calmer today, and that meant that men and supplies were unloaded on the beaches in even greater quantity. Already more than 300,000 men have landed, and now artificial harbours called mulberries are being taken across to Normandy to make docking easier.
Towed across the channel in segments, 2 mulberry harbours, the size of Dover, are expected to be assembled within the next few days. The operation will involve more than 40,000 troops. Each harbour will be able to handle up to 7 7,000-ton cargo ships and 12 coasters a day. Planners say that the ports of Cherbourg, Brest and Lorient are heavily defended and will be severely damaged by the time they fall into Allied hands. Without the new artificial harbours, the Allies would be less able to keep up their resupply of the invading armies during the coming weeks. The high priority given to the speedy assembly of the mulberries is just one reminder that while the main focus is always on frontline troops, it is in fact logistics which decide battles and wars. For example, just one infantry division needs 700 tons of supplies a day. Since the first equipment was landed on D-Day, the management of the beachheads has run into considerable problems. There's been a shortage of storage space and almost instant congestion on the beaches. Many follow-on units were unable to move inland because the advanced forces had failed to press on. By this time next week, commanders anticipate having landed more than 500,000 men, more than 80,000 vehicles, and about 180,000 tons of stores. However, unless the current pace of supplying the beaches can be increased, the Allied advance is in danger of grinding to a halt.
The Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower, has issued a proclamation to the people of France. It's been broadcast and printed on leaflets, thousands of which have been dropped by Allied aircraft. In it, General Eisenhower says the Allied forces will destroy the Nazi tyranny root and branch, so that the peoples of Europe may have a new birth of freedom. He warns the French people of further deprivation, and to collaborators, he says, those who have made common cause with the enemy will be removed.
In his proclamation, which was displayed in the liberated French towns, General Eisenhower urged the French people to lend every resource to help the Allies, although that effort might inflict further suffering on France. He promised that French citizens would be free to choose their own government, but significantly made no mention of the leader of the Free French, General Charles de Gaulle. Over the past days, French civilians, women, children and old people, but few men of military age, have been out to greet Allied troops. But many were surprised by the arrival of British and American soldiers, since in some areas the Germans had seized all radio sets. However, their welcome to the soldiers has frequently been low-key, even reserved, compared to that in other liberated countries. The people are grateful for food supplies, and the children haven't seen such sweets for years, but some soldiers have noted that food seems plentiful in parts of Normandy, and the people generally not malnourished. The French, for their part, are surprised to hear of rationing in Britain. From anonymity are now emerging the French resistance groups, the Maquis. Once out of hiding, they wear their insignia, red, white and blue armbands endorsed with the Cross of Lorraine. Many carry weapons which have been dropped by parachute from British planes. 3,000 members of the resistance are thought to have been active in Normandy. Their contribution to the Allied landings was a wave of sabotage to railways, bridges and telephone links, coordinated by British intelligence and triggered by code phrases broadcast on the BBC. The ravages of war have muted the response of the people of Normandy to liberation. Bombing has left the people numbed. Their towns are devastated. Thousands of civilians have lost their lives. For 4 years, they have survived under Nazi oppression. Now they are paying a heavy price for their freedom.
In Berlin, the mood is said to be somber. The German people have been told to expect a second Allied invasion. The German newspaper, the Völkische Beobachter, said today that the decisive battle for Europe is underway, which, if it is lost, would, it says, mean the end of Germany. Lord Haw-Haw, the traitor William Joyce, broadcast today from Germany. As usual, he was cutting across a British wavelength, but unusually for him, he was sounding uncertain about the outcome of the invasion.
Since it is obvious to all competent observers on both sides that the campaign is likely to be both complex and gradual in its development. For example, it is no secret that the Allies have as yet engaged only a portion of the forces allocated to the great enterprise, whilst it is equally clear that the great strategic reserves which Germany has built up in the West will be applied to the operations only when circumstances warrant their application.
The voice of the traitor William Joyce. So far, more than 4,000 German troops have been captured. They've been sent back across the Channel. Those thought to possess special information have been sent up to the London Cage, as it's called, for questioning. The others are being sent to POW camps around the country.
As the Allied advance continues, the number of German prisoners is steadily increasing. Their faces reflect the horror of battle and the indignity of capture. Thousands are marched to the beachheads. They reflect the mixed quality of the enemy forces, from proud, unrepentant officers to dejected young conscripts. Many of them slave troops taken from Russia, Poland, even Mongolia. The evacuation plans encompass not only our own wounded, but injured POWs too. They've been gathered on Normandy's beaches, awaiting transport to Britain. There's plenty of room aboard the hundreds of vessels pressed into service for the invasion. Their captains only too eager to have such a cargo for the return trip. The swelling tide of prisoners is causing log jams in the coastal towns which receive them. Officers are segregated from other ranks and trains take the prisoners to 4 locations in northern England or 2 in Scotland. Those who might well have valuable inside information on German military plans and deployment are sent to what's known as the London cage. Under the Geneva Convention, interrogation is forbidden, but government sources indicate they have evidence Hitler is flouting the rules of war in his treatment of Allied prisoners. A makeshift internment camp has been set up here at Kempton Park. It's filling up fast with bewildered young Germans who know it's all over, not only for them, but perhaps for their country too.
Britain's food stocks are good. The Minister of Food, Colonel J.J. Llewellyn, told the House of Commons today that, with the exception of milk, there should be no cut in rations this year.
Colonel Llewellyn said that the nation's health had been maintained, although there was some loss of middle-age spread. This news was greeted by cheers and laughter. Youngsters were actually putting on weight. The infant mortality rate was lower than ever before. Ration books were being distributed very efficiently by the local food offices. It could take as little as 15 seconds for a new ration book to be issued. On the whole, he wished to maintain existing rations for the remainder of the year, but there were a few changes. Milk is to be reduced from 4 pints to 3 per week. The cheese ration, however, will be raised from 2 ounces to 3 ounces per week. An extra pound of sugar per person per week will be issued for jam making. Carrots must not be sold at more than 6p a pound, and it was hoped that the price would go down to 4p halfpenny. The price of bread would be maintained, but it was never to exceed 9p for a £4 loaf. Dehydration, Colonel Llewellyn said, was a horrid word, and this was greeted with cheers, but a wonderful process. Now there is an entirely new product on the market, mashed potato powder. Winding up, the minister congratulated housewives on their ingenuity. But beware, he said, spam was spam, even though restaurants might call it jambon de Strasbourg aux endives. Later in the debate, the Conservative member for Aberdeen, Mr. Robert Boothby, took issue about the quality of bread. He said that the 2 great pleasures he looked forward to on the day the war ended was first to pull up all the blackout blinds and for the lights to shine out at night, and second that the government will no longer be in a position to force filthy brown bread down the throats of the people of this country against their will.
The Home Secretary, Mr. Herbert Morrison, has disclosed that so far the war has cost the United Kingdom some £19,000 million. Speaking in Norwich, Mr. Morrison said the government had spent more than twice the amount expended on the First World War. The weather in the Channel is worsening tonight with low cloud, mist and rain, though sea conditions are said to be moderating. Supreme Allied Headquarters has said that the landing of supplies is continuing despite the unfavourable conditions. Reinforcements are going ashore, and tonight large numbers of Royal Air Force bombers are once again heading for France as the battle along the Normandy beachhead reaches a critical phase. That was the news tonight, the 9th of June, 1944. From the BBC, good night.